Hello, my name is Devin Magda, and I will be giving a presentation on the geology and human impact of Glacier National Park. Here's my student ID. So to begin, the name of the park that I chose to do is Glacier National Park. It is located in Montana, United States of America, and the geographic location, its latitude is 48.75 degrees north, and the longitude is going to be negative 113 degrees west. So what the negative means is that it's going to be located in the western hemisphere. The park was established in May 11th, 1910. Not only that, I'm going to talk about a brief history of the park. So Glacier National Park is home to some of the oldest sedimentary rock in the world. It also lies along the Lewis Overthrust Fault Line, which is responsible for its landscape and unique rocks. The park also has over 1 million acres as well. So the geologic setting has allowed for these enormous features to occur with these cliffs and all that good stuff. Now, on this slide, I will be talking about the topographic features as well as some of the major features that are located within the Glacier National Park. So, in Glacier National Park, you're going to see mountains, cliffs, you're going to see some lakes, waterfalls. There's also a lot of streams and valleys, but the most important topographic feature is going to be glaciers, hence the name Glacier National Park. So I listed a few of the major topographic features that you'll see right away when you enter the park. It's probably some of the biggest topographic features as well. So we have Lake McDonald. We also have McDonald Falls, Hidden Lake, and Mount Cannon. I think McDonald Falls is probably the prettiest, and it attracts a lot of tourism just because a lot of people like seeing how clear the water is. Now, on this slide, I'm going more in depth on the geologic setting. So we already talked about how it's on the Lewis and Clark fault line, but the interesting thing, it's also a part of the Rocky Mountain Trench. So these mountains and cliffs were formed because of convergent plate boundaries, and like I said, I believe 2 slides ago, it contains some of the oldest sedimentary rock in the world. So this sedimentary rock was 1.6 billion years old, and it contains sandstone, shale, limestone, and argillite. So some geologic processes that have occurred within the park is going to be the sedimentation and deposition of rocks, the uplift of mountains, glaciation or carving of mountain valleys, which essentially means like glaciers would melt and pretty much the water would carve out the mountain valleys. So a lot of these mountains were built because of convergent plate boundaries. And a fun fact over here for you. So the argillite contributed to a lot of the steep slopes, and the sandstone ended up allowing for vertical faces to occur. Mainly because argillite is very soft, it's easily erodible compared to all the other rocks that are located within the park. So right here, I kind of talk about the water data. So it was really difficult to find a lot of water data on this area. However, we're going to start off with the drainage path. So it drains from McDonald Creek into Middle Fork Flathead River, into Flathead River, into Clark Fork, and then finally into the Pacific Ocean. So here we can see what McDonald Creek kind of looks like. So that's one of the major streams I noticed within the park. It pretty much flows through all out the Mount Cannon quadrangle. And we can kind of see this because of the topography of Glacier National Park. You see that it's very hilly, mountainous, very rugged, and this can actually influence the drainage path. So the drainage network ends up flowing from a very mountainous region all the way to the coastal regions and plains. So we can see that it moves from northwest to west, and the topography kind of changes, and it ultimately affects the flow of stream channels, and it actually determines the narrowness or wideness of these areas. So a lot of the water from Glacier National Park ends up coming from the precipitation or snowfall, and this ends up flowing into smaller streams and creeks that ultimately merge into larger rivers. So on this slide, I talk about a little bit more about the water data. So I couldn't find any information on a major stream called McDonald Creek, mainly just because there was nothing on that on the website. So instead, I chose Flathead River. So this river is relatively close to Glacier National Park, and we can see a lot of data from this. So we can identify that the river has quite a high stream flow from spring all the way up to the middle of summer. So from around April to May, you kind of see that there's heavy stream flow, which is going to mean higher amounts of precipitation, snowfall, which ends up getting into the river. So we can also see that from June to July is where the highest amounts of stream flow is. So I believe that's because all the snowfall and precipitation is melting and flowing into that river. And after July, we kind of see that from midsummer to the end of winter, the snowfall just decreases, mainly because snowfall is coming down, there's not as much precipitation occurring, and that water is just kind of staying there until it gets hot enough to melt. So in my opinion, I can kind of determine that the seasons play a huge role in determining if there's going to be a lot of stream flow or not much whatsoever. So I believe the reason it was difficult to find any information on McDonald Creek is because Glacier National Park's water is protected under the Clean Water Act. So we can kind of assume that the water is clean, but there's just not a lot of data on it, even though it's being monitored all the time. So on this slide, we're going to be talking about the geologic hazards. So there's 3 geologic hazards present in Glacier National Park. That's going to be landslides, wildfires, and flood events. So these landslides and rockfalls are occurring because there's steep slopes and many glacial features, and what the glaciers do is the water ends up kind of loosening up the rock. Like I said earlier, there was argillite, which is very soft and easily erodible. So the combination of that with some water causes landslides to occur in this area quite often. So with wildfires, there's not a lot based off the geologic setting that these occur. However, the increase in climate change has started to affect wildfires. So we can see that wildfires have been occurring more in Glacier National Park, which ultimately affects the precipitation patterns and can ultimately affect the landscape. I believe the most wildfires Glacier National Park has had in 1 year is 64, which is quite a lot when you think about it. So flood events are another major event that happens in Glacier National Park. Like we saw with the water data on the last slide, there's heavy rainfall and precipitation from June to July. So all this water is pretty much being melted all at once from the snow, and these can lead to flood events, which ultimately affects the landscape, and there's things that can be done in order to prevent this. So on this slide, we're going to be talking about the mitigation techniques and how it relates to the geologic setting and all that good stuff. So with Glacier National Park, the rugged mountainous terrain and steep slopes ultimately cause landslides. So in order to prevent these, we can put up retaining walls, implement drainage system and vegetation management. This can help stabilize slopes and prevent soil erosion. So another thing is with wildfires, we can also implement an early detection and response system. And this will allow firefighters to respond earlier to this, so not as much damage can occur and so not as many people get hurt. Going into that, we also have a lot of flood events that can be prevented with dams or levees and implementing vegetation management. This can ultimately lead to less damage, allow for people to be safer, and protect property as well. So on this slide, we kind of talk about how the national park and humans work together. So Glacier National Park is surrounded by many towns and cities. The two main ones are Whitefish and Kalispell. So these towns have attracted many visitors. It's promoted many jobs. It's actually kept about 5,000 jobs in business and supported the local economies. So the national park ends up providing a source of clean water, air, and natural resources. And fun fact, in 2018, 3 million visitors actually came to the park and generated about $344 million just for nearby communities. So tourism has brought a lot of money into the economy. However, there are both positive and negative effects surrounding tourism. So on the positive side, there's an increase in jobs. We're generating plenty of revenue for other businesses. We're also spreading awareness about the importance of protecting the parks. And we can also see how tourism has increased the amount of visitors that have come into the park. So the economy is being promoted. We're improving infrastructure to support tourism, and we are also creating better environmental conditions for the cities. Since the park is protected, they kind of want to keep that around the other cities as well. Now, on the negative effects, since more people have been coming into the area, there's an increase in carbon emissions because of transportation. More people are showing up to the park, and that is causing overcrowding. We're also seeing an increase in noise pollution. There's more pressure on natural resources since more people are coming out this way. And we're also noticing that energy and water is being used more. Not only that, but you might see that more people coming can kind of be a threat to wildlife and biodiversity, because the more resources that get used end up affecting the park's ecosystem as well. Now, a fun fact that I put here is that these climate changes have ended up causing more wildfires to occur, which end up ultimately affecting the landscape. So, in conclusion, I have determined that by studying this park, we can see how the impacts of climate change have caused more wildfires to occur. So the importance of this as well is we got to understand what created Glacier National Park, which we can see with the Lewis and Clark fault line, as well as the 1.6 billion year old sedimentary rock. It really allows us to get a better understanding of how Glacier National Park was developed and created. So there's also a huge cultural and historical significance. I believe there were tribes that actually lived around Glacier National Park. So another thing is, with these slides, we saw how tourism has impacted the park's ecosystem, as well as brought in business for other people, and how it's negatively impacted the park as well. So the most important aspect of this final project to me is that we were learning how to raise awareness for these national parks in order to protect these ecosystems, protect biodiversity, and ultimately keep our wildlife safe, which is the most important part overall. And then finally, these are my references for what I used whenever I was doing the PowerPoint. And I hope you liked everything. I hope this PowerPoint was very informational, and I hope you learned something new that you didn't know previously about Glacier National Park. Thank you. Bye.